My name is Jennifer Bennett. For 26 years, I kept one secret from the two people I loved most. Then a hospital test threatened to expose it. My husband believed we were fighting for his life. I knew our family might not survive what came next. My husband Paul and our daughter Emma had no idea, but I knew the truth was coming. It had started months earlier. At first, we blamed stress. Paul was always tired. Bruises appeared without explanation. A simple cold lingered for weeks. After months of tests, the doctors finally gave us an answer: leukemia. Everything changed overnight. Chemotherapy gave us hope. For a while, it worked. Then the cancer came back. This time, the doctors didn't have many options. The best chance of long-term survival is a stem cell transplant, the specialist explained. They immediately began searching the National Donor Registry. Then he looked at us. We'd also like to test any close biological relatives. Before Paul or I could respond, Emma spoke. Test me. Paul smiled. Emma, I'm serious. She reached across the hospital bed and took his hand. If I can help save your life, I want to. She was 26 years old, confident, compassionate, the kind of daughter every parent hopes to raise. Paul looked at her with tears in his eyes. You've already made me proud enough. A few days later, the hospital took blood samples. Neither Paul nor Emma gave the tests another thought. Waiting for the results felt endless. Emma tried to reassure Paul. If I'm not a match, they'll find someone else. Paul smiled. They will. Then he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You offering was enough. She leaned into him. I just want my dad to get better. Watching them together hurt me more than I could describe. For 26 years, I'd watched them love each other without question. They were both waiting for the test results. I was dreading what those results might expose, for reasons neither of them could possibly understand. Every call from the hospital filled me with fear. A week later, the transplant specialist asked all three of us to come back. The moment we walked into his office, I felt my stomach tighten. He invited us to sit. I'm afraid Emma isn't a suitable donor. Paul nodded. We knew that was a possibility. The doctor hesitated. There is something else. The room became very still. The tissue typing showed genetic patterns we weren't expecting. Paul frowned. What does that mean? It doesn't happen often, the doctor replied carefully. But occasionally, these tests raise questions about biological relationships within a family. Paul gave a small, confused laugh. I'm not following. The lab repeated the testing because they believed there had been an error. He paused. The second analysis produced the same result. Paul's smile disappeared. What result? The doctor looked directly at him. The findings suggest Emma is not biologically related to you. Silence. Paul blinked, then shook his head. How is that possible? The doctor continued calmly. This is not a DNA test, so we can't draw a final conclusion. There are other explanations. We recommend a formal DNA test to confirm or rule out what we're seeing. Paul immediately began searching for answers. The samples were mixed up. The lab made a mistake. Maybe someone labeled the tubes incorrectly. The doctor nodded politely. A DNA test will give us certainty. Paul looked at me. Jennifer, what do you think? I forced myself to smile. I'm sure there's an explanation. It was the biggest lie I'd told in 26 years because I already knew. The truth had finally caught up with me. The DNA test was performed 2 days later. Waiting for those results felt even longer than before. Paul spent those days convincing himself the hospital would call and confirm that a terrible mistake had been made. When the hospital finally called, none of us spoke during the drive there. The same doctor was waiting when we arrived. He closed the office door behind us. I'm afraid the DNA results are conclusive. My heart stopped. I already knew what was coming. He opened the folder on his desk. Emma is not biologically related to Mr. Bennett. Paul stared at him. The doctor continued. She is also not biologically related to Mrs. Bennett. Emma frowned. That's impossible. It shouldn't be possible, the doctor agreed, but the results are clear. Paul looked at me, then back at the doctor. There had to be a hospital mix-up. The doctor nodded. It has happened before. Paul immediately grabbed onto the idea. That's it. They switched babies. There has to be another family out there. He turned to me. Jennifer, we'll figure this out. I couldn't look at him. He stopped speaking. For several long seconds, he simply watched me. Then quietly, he asked, "Why aren't you surprised?" I closed my eyes. The room disappeared. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. Jennifer, what aren't you telling us? I opened my eyes. There was nowhere left to hide. I took a slow, trembling breath. Before Emma was born, your father and I spent almost 8 years trying to have a baby. No one spoke. Paul stood perfectly still. Emma looked from him to me, then back again. She was waiting for one of us to tell the doctor he'd made a mistake. Neither of us did. Paul's voice was barely above a whisper. If there wasn't a hospital mistake, he swallowed. Then whose daughter is she? I closed my eyes. For 26 years, I'd rehearsed this moment in my head. I'd imagined what I would say. I'd imagined how Paul would look at me. I'd imagined Emma walking away. Nothing prepared me for actually living it. I looked at my husband. The day you left for Germany. I was 37 weeks pregnant. Paul nodded slowly. I remember. We weren't worried. The doctor told us we still had time. You were only supposed to be gone for 8 days. His eyes never left mine. Remember 2 days after your plane took off. I went into labor. The room was silent. What I didn't tell you is that there were complications. Our daughter didn't survive. Paul stared at me. The color drained from his face. No. It came out almost like a child refusing to believe bad news. I nodded once. The bleeding was so severe the doctors had to perform an emergency hysterectomy. I woke up without our baby, and without any chance of ever having another. Paul slowly sat back down. He looked completely lost. Our daughter, he whispered. She died? I nodded. Before I could continue, he asked the question I'd feared for 26 years. Why didn't you tell me? I took a shaky breath. Because I was terrified. I'd just lost our daughter. I'd lost any chance of giving you another child. And somewhere inside my grief, I became desperate. I convinced myself I was about to lose you too. Paul shook his head. You don't know that. I know. I know that now. But 26 years ago, I wasn't thinking like the woman sitting here today. I was thinking like someone who had lost everything in a single morning. There was a nurse who stayed with me after the doctor left. She didn't try to tell me everything would be okay. She simply sat beside me while I cried. Before she left, she told me something. There was another young mother on the maternity floor. She planned to place her baby for adoption. The nurse wasn't suggesting anything improper. She simply wanted me to know that someday, if I was ever ready, motherhood might still be possible. So what happened? Emma asked. I looked down at my hands. I couldn't stop thinking about that baby. So later that afternoon, I went to meet the young mother. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old. She had grown up in foster care. She had no family, no money, no one waiting for her outside that hospital. But the moment I walked into her room, I knew one thing. She loved her daughter. She loved her enough to believe someone else could give her a better life. I told her about us, 8 years of infertility, the baby we'd lost, the surgery, the fear. Then I asked her something no grieving mother should ever ask another. I asked, what if she came home with me instead? Emma covered her mouth. She cried. I cried. Paul just stared at the floor. I stood up to leave her hospital room because I knew I'd crossed the line. But before I reached the door, she stopped me. She told me she had spent her entire pregnancy convincing herself that adoption was the right decision. But the moment you were born, she didn't know if she could let you go. She only wanted to know one thing. If my daughter grows up with you, will she be loved? I told her yes, and I meant it. I have never lied about loving you, Emma. My voice broke, but everything else was built on the worst decision I have ever made. I stopped. Neither Paul nor Emma spoke because they both knew the hardest part of the story still hadn't been told. Paul finally looked up. So she agreed to give you the baby? I nodded. The next morning, she told the hospital she'd changed her mind about the adoption. They discharged her, and she left the hospital with you. I left the hospital later that afternoon. Paul's face tightened. You met her? I nodded. Yes, in a parking lot outside her apartment. Emma closed her eyes. I continued quietly. She carried you the entire time. She held you so tightly I thought she'd changed her mind. I almost wanted her to, because if she had, I could have blamed her. I could have gone home and mourned my daughter. Instead, she kissed your forehead. She placed you in my arms. She handed me your diaper bag. And then she said something I've heard in my head every single day since. Please make sure she always knows her mother loved her. I promised her I would. And for 26 years, I hated myself because I realized I only kept half of the promise I made to her. Emma's eyes filled with tears. You loved me. Yes. But you never told me about her. I'm so sorry. I convinced myself I was protecting all of us. I was wrong. Paul sat perfectly still. Then he quietly asked the question I knew was coming. When I came home, you already had her. I nodded. We met you at the airport. I watched you hold Emma for the first time. You cried. You kept saying, I can't believe she's finally here. I should have told you the truth right then. I'm sorry that I didn't. I told myself, just one more day. Then one more became 1 month. 1 month became 1 year. And before I knew it, 26 years had passed. No one spoke. Finally, Paul looked at me. Our daughter died, and you didn't tell me. You let me believe I'd watched my daughter grow up. You let me tell people about the happiest day of my life, when the child I thought I brought home wasn't even ours. Another long silence settled over the room. Then Paul said something I never expected. I could forgive almost everything else. But you stole my chance to grieve my little girl, and I don't know if I can ever forgive that. There was no answer I could give. because he was right. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Father's Day, he had celebrated one daughter while never knowing the other had existed. That was the part I could never give back. The room felt smaller somehow, like there wasn't enough air left for any of us. Emma was the first to break the silence. She looked at Paul, then back at me. When did I become yours? The question caught me completely off guard. You said Dad met me at the airport. I nodded. So, her voice trembled. Before that, I belonged to someone else. Tears filled my eyes. She stared at the floor. I've been trying to figure out who I am ever since we got the results. I keep thinking maybe I should be angry. She laughed softly through her tears, but all I feel is, she searched for the right word, lost. Paul reached for her hand. She took it. I don't know who I look like. I don't know whose laugh I have. I don't know where I came from. Then she looked at me. But I know who raised me. Her voice cracked. You packed my lunches. You stayed up all night when I had the flu. You embarrassed me at every school concert because you cried louder than everyone else. A small smile appeared through my tears. Then it disappeared. You are my mother. She looked at Paul. And you're my father. Paul squeezed her hand. I always will be. Emma nodded. I know. She looked back at me. But I don't understand something. If you love me that much, why didn't you trust me with the truth? That question hurt more than every accusation that had come before it, because there wasn't a good answer, only an honest one. I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting you. I told myself I was protecting your father. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. The room was silent. I was terrified that if either of you knew, you'd stop loving me. Emma stared at me for a long time. Then she slowly shook her head. You didn't give us the chance to decide. I nodded. You're right. I didn't. Paul finally spoke. That's what hurts the most. He wasn't angry anymore, just tired. You made every decision alone. You decided what I could survive. You decided what Emma deserved to know. You decided what another mother would have to live with. He looked down at the DNA report still lying on the table. You carried the burden by yourself. But you also took away everyone else's choice. I couldn't argue with any of it because it was true. The doctor knocked gently before opening the door. I'm sorry to interrupt. The transplant coordinator is ready to see you. Reality returned all at once. Cancer, treatment, a life that refused to pause while our family fell apart. Paul stood up slowly. Emma wrapped her arms around him and he held her tightly. My dad, she whispered. Paul closed his eyes. Always. When they separated, he reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation. Then they looked at me. I didn't know whether I still belonged beside them, but I reached for Emma's free hand. She didn't smile. She didn't squeeze my fingers or tell me she forgave me, but she didn't pull away. It was more grace than I deserved. The three of us walked out together. Nothing had been repaired. Nothing had been forgiven. But for the first time in 26 years, there were no lies left between us. The truth had taken away the family we thought we were. Now we had to decide whether it had left enough for us to become one again.